Hello everybody, welcome back to Storytime with Rob. This is episode number 8. I just finished episode number 7 like 20 minutes ago, but I'm gonna do another one just because it was so short. Now I very well may not be releasing this immediately after the other one, or I might. I don't know. I honestly am enjoying this story a lot, so I kind of want to keep going because I don't really know how it ends, and I kind of want to, finish it so I know. You would think that I would already know, but hey, what can you do? I don't know. Let's go ahead and let's pick up right where we left off on the last episode, and yeah, let's get into it. Thank you. I don't remember much from when I was 15, but I remember the ride to my Aunt Judy's house down in Tennessee. It was just me and my mother in the car, the air conditioner the only noise for a several-hour drive, though it wasn't the only reason for the chill in the air. I remember knowing that my mother hated me and being terribly sad about that fact, especially because I deserved it. That's the fucked up thing. I remember feeling that I had earned everything I was getting somehow, but I didn't know why. Until the last few days, I've been sleepwalking through a life built on an obscured past without even questioning what would cause me to not remember something so important. But I've woken up now, at least a little. Every day bits of memory are coming back to me, but only about those things I've been told. As though someone has to point out objects in a shadowed room for me to notice that they are there. I had decided that I would talk to Mills on the phone and get more details of what went on before visiting my mother. The idea was that I would be better armed with knowledge, and to be honest, I wanted to be able to learn enough to talk myself into abandoning the idea of contacting my mother at all. The last time I spoke to her was over the phone on my 18th birthday, and it was not a long or heartwarming conversation. It ended with her saying that she'd hope she'd never hear from me again, and I have lived up to that hope for over a decade. But despite repeated calls and texts, I hadn't been able to get Mills yet, though I kept trying on the road to Euclid, Ohio. Hearing Mills' voicemail always made my heart jump slightly, though increasingly it was from fear rather than from excitement or joy. I didn't want to panic, and I'd already booked a flight for Austin from the Cleveland airport for late tonight, but it was still hard to keep my mind on what I was doing while worrying about her. In some ways, it was a blessing because I arrived at my mother's house before I realized it. I had never seen it before, only knowing where she lived thanks to my aunt, who kept hoping we would reconcile someday and would periodically slip me unsolicited updates on how my mother was faring and what she was up to. It's not that I didn't care, I cared a lot. It was just that reminders of her were also reminders of a lot of pain and loss. I had always been closer to my father growing up, and when he died suddenly when I was 15, it sent both me and my mother into a tailspin. I froze as I realized something. I didn't remember how my father died. I didn't remember anything other than that he's dead. What the fuck was wrong with me? The terror and anger of realizing how profound my memory gaps truly were drove me from the car and up to the front door of the house. It was a small but nice house in a pleasant neighborhood, and I tried to knock as demurely as I could for both the neighbor's sake and my mother's. Still, I knew I probably looked wild-eyed when she opened the door. "Hi, hello, Mom." I'm sorry I didn't call or warn you, but I was afraid you wouldn't see me if you knew I was coming. I smiled weakly, my stomach churning in knots. I was afraid if I stopped talking, she would just slam the door in my face, which might still happen anyway. I just really need to talk to you for a few minutes. I won't stay long, and I will never bother you again if you want. Can I please come in and talk to you for a few minutes? It's very important. I could hear my voice shaking, and I hated it, but it couldn't be helped. For her part, my mother's initial look of surprise had slowly slid down into a look of suspicious anger.
Are you on drugs? Is this what this is?
Her voice was dry and hoarse-sounding now, and I wonder if she started smoking again. She had stopped when I was little, when something happened. Fuck.
I hear on TV about junkie kids coming to kill their parents.
She raised a thinly penciled eyebrow.
I think you've done enough killing already.
I clenched my teeth, my anger and frustration burning away my guilt and fear for the moment as I had took a step forward and jabbed a finger at her face. There. That right fucking there. I am so sick of this, of all of this. People are treating me like I'm a piece of glass or that they're shitting on me for things that I don't remember. No, fuck that. I realized I had made it 5 steps into the house by now, my mother retreating from my angry tirade. Taking a deep breath, I started over. Look, I'm sorry. I know you don't want me here. I don't want to be here. But I need answers for things that I don't remember. I'm not on drugs, and I'm not going to hurt you. I just need your help. My mother looked up at me, her lips pressed into a thin line.
I don't have any money to give you.
I rolled my eyes. I don't need money. I just need help remembering things. Studying me carefully, she narrowed her gaze again.
What kinds of things?
I'd been mostly looking down at the floor since entering, but now I met her eyes again. Like why you hate me, for one. I really don't remember why or what happened when I was 15. I saw her eyes begin watering, and at first I thought it was sadness at how far apart we drifted, or regret for sending me away. But then I realized it was raw hurt and anger.
Get out. I won't hear any of this bullshit in my own shitting house.
She was screaming like a mad woman now, her eyes wide and her face red as she advanced on me.
That was always your problem. You never admit what you've done. Never admit to killing them or letting them get killed, whichever it was.
I stood my ground. They? Who is they? Who did I kill or let get killed? She had reached me now, beating upon my chest with her small, thin hands.
Damn you, Alex. What is wrong with you? Are you telling me you don't remember? Are you still gonna play this game after all this time?
I gently grabbed her wrists and held them still for a minute. Mom, Cassidy and Ellis are dead. They've been murdered because of something that we all were doing as kids. And if I don't figure out what's going on, it may happen to the rest of us too. I sighed. Fuck. It might even if I do figure it out. I let go of her wrists and stepped back. I'm not playing games. I really don't remember. I never could. I can't explain it. But it's only since I've been talking to the others the last few days that I've started to remember any of it. So I'm going to ask you one last time. Please talk to me for a minute. Explain to me what went on. Then I'll go away forever. My mother wiped at her eyes, and I could see her fingers were yellowed with age and cigarette tar. I realized that I had smelled alcohol in her breath when she was close by as well. She was looking at me like a wounded animal, and I hated myself for making it all worse for her by being here. And if she wasn't going to...
I don't know everything. I don't know much, really. But I'll tell you what I can. And then you have to go. You were always so close with your friends. When you were younger, I was happy for you. I know how hard childhood can be, and to have so many close friends can be a blessing. But as you got older and moved to that damn school, things started changing. You were more quiet and you barely talked to us about what was going on with you anymore. At first, I chalked it up to adolescence. You were a growing boy, and I knew from my brothers growing up that a teenage boy can be hard to be around. And you weren't mean or getting into trouble. You were just not there. You were gone a lot of the time, and when you were home, you could tell your mind was off somewhere else. When strange things started happening around the school and the town, we didn't pay it much mind. Your father liked to joke about the teacher ghost, but we really thought that's all it was, a silly joke or a myth. But when we almost had that car accident that one time, and, well, you may not remember it, but it was almost really bad. And the way it didn't happen was so strange. I should have known then something wasn't right. Maybe I could have helped you. Got you away from those kids, that school. Still, people are blind to things so much, right? So time passed, and I heard of things happening, but I guess I ignored it, or thought it was just talk. Then one night you came in and said that Alicia was gone. That she had been taken by the thing at school. I didn't know what you were talking about, but you were all torn up and terrified. So
Who's Alicia? I felt as though my head was being torn apart, and as I spoke, each word echoed across my brain like a monstrous bell being rung. I saw my mother wanting to grow angry again, but she wrestled it back down when she saw how much pain I was in.
My God, you really don't know. I think you've really forgot her.
We had still been standing at the edge of her living room while we talked, and she moved now to her mantel to retrieve a picture frame. It was a photo of me at about age 12, along with my parents and a young girl that looked to be about 8. My mother held the picture in front of my face, tapping the girl with a long yellow nail.
That's Alicia. That's your sister.
She dropped her arm and staggered back, her face looking impossibly old and tired.
That's half of why I couldn't be around you anymore. I could never believe that you really forgot her. How could you forget a person? Especially her. She was so sweet and good, and she loved you so much.
She was crying freely now, and I wanted to comfort her, but I didn't quite dare.
We all loved each other so much. But then you got caught up in whatever was going on at that school.
Her face was harder now, tears sliding down her cheek like water on granite.
I don't know what you got tangled up in, whether it was some kind of cult or if there really was some ghost or something at that school. All I know is that when you came in all scared and bloody, your father went to bring our baby girl back. I tried to get you to stay with me, but you ran out after he left. I called the police, but they were already there. 7 people died that night. They never found my baby girl. But they found your father's body in the gymnasium. Or parts of it, at least.
Her eyes were dry and blazing again.
And you, I was so scared of you. Even when I knew you must have had some hand in her being at that school so late in the evening, especially when you were the one that knew where she was. When we found you and your friends out on the football field later that night, all unconscious, I was so relieved. Both because you were safe, and because maybe you had answers. Maybe you could help us find your father and Alicia.
Her tone grew more wooden as she talked, and her eyes had wandered to the picture in her hands. She stroked it absently as she went on.
But then they found your father around the time the EMTs were checking you kids out. They said you were scraped up, but otherwise fine. Rescue crews were still searching the school, but I took you to the car and asked you what had happened. Where you had seen Alicia last.
Her grip tightened on the frame until I heard a crack.
And you know what you said to me? Who's
Alicia? I finished with her, remembering it as it was being told. I still didn't know what had led up to that moment, but I remember my mother that night, so sad and scared, staring at me with her mouth open for several moments, asking me again and again, shaking my shoulders, and then she slapped me across the face. I could see that she was remembering that too.
I know it seems like I've treated you bad, Alex, and I guess I have. But just like you couldn't help what you remembered, I couldn't help how that made me feel. I tried getting investigators, psychologists, even a preacher to talk to you. Tried to help you remember or quit lying if you weren't being honest about what you knew, but nothing helped. And every day I felt like you were slowly killing your sister by either intentionally being evil or just stupid and weak enough to block out the most important thing you could ever know.
She wiped her nose as she shook her head.
I'm sorry, but I'm done. I've spent years trying to forget all of this, to forget about you. I'm sorry you're in trouble now, especially if it's not your fault. But I can't be around you anymore. I don't hate you, Alex. I just don't love you either. Not anymore.
I left my mother's house and drove to a nearby parking lot where I just cried for a few minutes. I think the part of me had always thought that we would reconcile, and the loss of that hope, coupled with the memories of my baby sister flooding back as I tried to cope with losing her too, it was more than I could handle at first. I didn't know how much I was to blame for what had happened to her and my father, but that didn't lessen my grief or my guilt. After a while, I checked my phone. No word from Mills, and 2 hours until my flight. I decided to try her again, and this time she picked up right away. Except it wasn't her. It was Thomas.
Hey, Alex. Mills can't come to the phone right now, mainly because I have her tied up in the other room. Been trying to get the professor to sit on her chest, which, fuck me, you probably don't even know what I'm talking about, but it doesn't matter. We need you, buddy. I think it'll work if you're here.
I was momentarily confused, trying to decide if he could potentially be joking or something, but that made no sense. He wouldn't go all the way to Austin for a joke. And his voice sounded strange, like he was caught between laughing and crying. Or just in the middle of going insane. Look, you're right. I don't know what you're talking about, but I'll come and we'll figure it out. Is she okay? Have you heard her? Thomas gave an uneven laugh.
No, she almost broke my arm, but she's fine. Not gonna hurt either of you. But I need you to both contact the professor. Ask for its help.
Help?
With Cassidy. With bringing her back to life.
Thomas, you need to stop this. I know you're upset, out of your head with grief even, but this isn't the answer. I had spent a hellish 5 hours since my brief surprise phone call with Thomas, waiting at the airport, waiting on the plane, waiting for a rental car, and then driving as fast as I could to get to Mill's house outside of Austin. I didn't think he would hurt her, but I hadn't thought that he would tie her up either. When I knocked on her door, he answered right away, and though I could tell he'd been crying, he looked oddly happy to see my face. He actually went to give me a hug before seeming to absently remember that he had a small revolver in his right hand. With an embarrassed shrug, he gestured with the gun for me to come in. When I first entered the house, I moved past Thomas and started calling for Mills. She yelled back, and I found her laying on the bed in the room, her ankles and wrists tied with thin, yellow rope. I had untied her right away, knowing that he was at my back with a gun, but not caring. Once I knew she was okay, I hugged her and turned to look at Thomas, who asked us to come sit on the sofa in the living room. It was there that I started trying to talk him back from the edge where he was teetering on. But looking at my friend, his eyes weighed down with a hard glaze of insanity. My heart sank as I realized I wasn't going to be able to reason with him.
No, Alex. You're wrong. I've thought it all out. We're creating this thing, right? And it's powerful. Able to do all kinds of things. It's magic. So what's to stop it from helping us out with Cassidy?
How about the fact that it just fucking killed her last week?
Mills snarled at him, the anger and fear in her voice scaring me more than Thomas. I needed to get her out of here. At least she'd be safe and maybe I could calm him down alone, but Thomas didn't seem angry. He was nodding and smiling as though being patient with children who just didn't understand.
I see your point and why you'd think that, but for the last few nights, I've been having dreams. Or really, the same dream repeatedly. At first, I thought it was just stress and grief, but when it happened a third time, well, I realized it had to be the professor. It was sending me a message, telling me about what it could do.
Mills gave him a warning look.
Thomas, stop it.
Looking at me, her eyes worried, she said,
Do you remember a girl named Alicia?
I had been holding her hand and I gave it a squeeze now. Yeah, I do now. I came from my mother's. It didn't go well, but she told me about my sister. I've spent the last few hours remembering more and more about her since. I felt myself getting choked up again and pushed it down, turning back to Thomas. I loved Mills for being worried for me, but I was tired of being protected. So what did you see in the dream that makes you think the professor will help? What doesn't Mills want you to tell me? Thomas smiled wide, his eyes glittering in the sunken hollows. He looked 10 years older than even after Cassidy's funeral, and I wondered for a moment when he'd gotten any restful sleep. His voice and his movements had a disquieting jerkiness to them, like a corpse dancing to electric current. I stifled a shiver at the thought as I tried to listen.
And then I was floating in the old gym at Stonebrook, floating past the floor and down into that old pool. You don't remember when we were down in that pool, do you, Alex? Well, that's all right. But I was down there, and I could feel the old professor down there with me too. But I wasn't scared. I was happy. It was like seeing an old friend, except I couldn't really see him too well, of course. And he kept looking like different things. But then I heard something moving around in the shadows of the pool, sloshing around in that smelly water down there in the dark. It was funny. I could see down there, but I couldn't see either. Not everything. It wasn't until I started floating out into the middle of the pool that I saw clearly what it was. It was Alicia, all grown up, or at least a lot bigger than when we lost her. And she was alive. I don't know how, but she was alive down there in the dark. I saw her look at me and, well, she kind of smiled, I think. Just think, Alex. If it can keep her alive all this time, it can bring back Cassidy. I felt like that's what it was telling me.
He stopped talking suddenly, staring at me as though he had expected his words to have answered any questions that involved any conflicts. That's fucking crazy, Tom. That's impossible. I stood up and he raised his gun half-heartedly, but I ignored it. If it was the professor contacting you and not just a dream, it wasn't trying to help you. It was trying to trick you. It killed Ellis. Did you know that? It fucking crushed him against the ceiling of a parking garage like a goddamn roach. That's your buddy, the professor. That's the thing you're siding with over your own fucking best friends. I was standing there over him now, and his lips were quivering as tears began filling his eyes. I heard Mills start softly crying behind me at the news of Ellis, but I kept my gaze on Thomas for the moment as he struggled to speak.
We just need to try, okay? Get the professor to sit on our chest, any of us, talk to it. Even if I'm wrong or crazy, we need to try and talk to it, right? Find out why it's killing us.
I reached down and snatched the gun away from him without resistance. I don't even know what the fuck you're talking about. Sit on our chest? What the fuck does that even mean? I cast my gaze back to Mills, who had just a haunted look on her tear-streaked face. Do you know? She nodded slowly.
I do, yeah. But I think it's a bad idea, if it would even work now.
Thomas looked past me at her.
It would. It would with him here. Alex was always its favorite.
I went to rub my face and realized I was still holding the gun. Frowning disgustedly, I emptied it onto the floor and then set the gun down on the coffee table before stepping back to face both of them. Look, I want to know the rest of what's going on. Mills, I think you should leave, or me and Thomas can. He can catch me up on his own. She was already shaking her head.
No, I'm not leaving you. No offense, Thomas, but I don't trust you for shit at the moment, and you're too upset to tell him everything anyway.
Thomas was crying softly now, his head buried in one of his hands.
I know. You're right. I'm fucked up. Please tell him. Maybe he'll understand if we tell him the rest.
He looked up briefly, his eyes red.
I really am sorry. I'd never hurt you guys. I'm just so fucking scared and alone.
I squatted down next to his chair and gave him a brief hug. We're all scared, man, but you're not alone. Let her tell me the rest and we'll figure something out, okay? He nodded and I stood up again, moving to sit with Mills again. She was still almost painfully beautiful. Even scared and exhausted and terribly sad, her face shone with this inner light that just touched the core of me. Watching her trying to find the right words, working to find the least painful path through making me relive the worst thing that ever happened to us. I knew then that I was still in love with her. Would always be in love with her, and only her. It was a strange time to have such a happy revelation, but I held on to the warmth of it as I waited for her to begin.
By the end of the 8th grade, the Stonebrook Six pretty much ran the middle school. We didn't bully anyone, but the strange combination of fear and mystery surrounding us was a powerful brew. We were popular without trying, at least on a surface level. And that's all that really mattered, because, as always, we really only wanted to hang out with each other anyways. When we got into the 9th grade, things were different at first. Despite sharing the same main building and campus, there was a fairly sharp social divide between the two schools at Stonebrook, and we were now going from being the eldest middle schoolers to lowly freshmen. It meant older kids, different teachers, and more time having passed since the last tangible signs of the professor. People like to forget things that don't suit them. They use time and the elasticity of memories to sand off the rough edges of the past, and those things that are too hard to be reshaped are stored away in a musty corner of their mind. The professor, as compelling as it was in some ways, was an uncomfortable thought. And like any uncomfortable thought, it spent quite some time walking on the knife's edge of the townsfolk collective and individual consciousness. On the one side, the eventual oblivion of rationalization and explanation. On the other, the same neglect and dusty demise that befell childhood memories and unpleasant pasts. During most of our 9th grade year, I think the professor was teetering between those two kinds of death, and its balance on the blade grew weaker with each passing day. If we had only left it alone, it might have faded away for good that year. But we didn't. We didn't want the professor to die, and I think we could have all sensed it needed our help to survive. Without any plan or coordination, we all began talking about the professor again in our subterranean hideaway. I mean, we'd always talked about it a little, even if just in a joke or a passing reference, but by the spring of our freshman year, we were back to discussing it regularly. The breath of our words fanning the embers back to life. I was largely to blame. I had taken it upon myself to do research on different myths and legends, specifically magical creatures that seemed similar to our professor, if I could find any. That was how I wound up reading about tulpas and telling you all about them. Tulpas, from what I remember, are supposed to be beings created by mental or spiritual energies of one or more people. Kind of like an imaginary friend you make real by believing hard enough. It was a strange idea, but it seemed to fit the professor better than anything else based on what we knew about it. Around the same time, Ellis came up with the idea of trying to see the professor. We weren't even sure it was still around, and the idea of verifying its continued presence in some way was attractive to all of us. Ellis's idea led us getting a large baby pool and sneaking it into the back room down into our secret lair. We filled it with a few inches of water and then began calling to the professor. The idea was this. The professor was always invisible, and past attempts that we had made to just ask it to show itself had gone unanswered. So either it couldn't become visible to us, or it didn't want to. But if it was at least willing to come and visit us, and if it had some kind of physical form, we might be able to get some sense of its size or shape in the water. It was an odd idea, and Ellis admitted it was a long shot, but we figured it was worth trying, with the fun and challenge of sneaking the pool into the school almost worth the price of admission by itself. The funny thing was that it kind of worked. We set the pool up, asked the professor to come as we stood around the water holding hands, and this time it came. We could all feel it there, and after a few seconds, Cassidy let out an excited gasp as the water began to slosh in the pool. As the liquid settled, you could see voids where the water didn't go. It was hard to say for sure, but it looked as though the professor was standing on 2 invisible legs in the pool. Except then it became 4 voids instead of 2. Then 1 larger one. Then 8 small ones. On and on we watched as the water would slosh and settle, every time a different shape or configuration. Then it was gone. We all began talking excitedly at first. We didn't really understand what we had just seen. Then I realized what it was. It was changing shape repeatedly as it stood in the water. Big, small, many legs, or none. It must have shifted between a dozen things in the span of a couple minutes. We were excited about all this, of course, but rather than satisfying our curiosity to know more about the professor, it just made us hungrier for the next step. Alex, you were the one that came up with the way of communicating with it. One day when we were all skipping a school assembly together, you started telling us about a theory you had. You said that if we really had made the professor up, made it what it was, why couldn't we make up a way of talking to it too? The idea caught on with all of us right away. We talked about it for a couple of weeks, figuring out and agreeing on the details, but by the end of the school year, we were ready to try it out. The end result was very simple, in part because making up rituals can be hard, and in part because I think we instinctually weeded out the elements that didn't work. I understand that's contrary to the base idea we were working from. In theory, any idea for the ritual should have worked so long as we believed in it enough. But that's just one example of why I don't think we had as much control on things as we thought at the time. At some point, the newest and last member of the Stonebrick Six started guiding us. The ritual went like this. We sat cross-legged in a circle, knees touching and one of us holding a lit candle. We repeated the phrase,
"Professor, come and join us. Professor, come and talk to us."
And with each repetition, the candle would be passed to the next person in a counterclockwise manner. If the candle flame turned green, it meant the professor was present and willing to talk to us. The flame change was important, we had decided, because we wanted definitive proof if the professor came to talk. We were all excited to try it out, but when we went to do it the first time, we were all laughing a little and making jokes. I remember thinking it was odd that the year before the idea of trying to talk to the professor directly would have terrified me, but now I was somehow not only okay with it, but very concerned that we weren't taking it seriously enough for it to work. But I needn't have worried. The professor wanted to talk to us, and the candle hadn't made a full circle before the flame turned a bright, eerie green. You were holding it at the time, Alex, and suddenly the professor was you. Having the professor speak through you is an odd sensation. You don't feel like it's quite inside you, but rather that it's sitting on top of you somehow. You feel an immense weight on your chest, and while it completely controls your voice and expressions when it's on you, it doesn't really feel like that most of the time. It's more like someone is sitting on your chest and blocking your face from everyone while drowning out what you're saying in their own words and emotions. which, of course, is where we came up with the name. Over the next few months, we talked to the professor several times, and it sat on each of our chests more than once. Most of those seemed like magical experiences at the time, and though we were talking to a miracle, which I guess in some ways we were. But the first and last times were terrifying. When you were holding the candle and the flame turned green for the first time, we were all shaken. I don't know that any of us really expected it to work, and even if it did, we had no way of knowing how the professor would try to communicate. We'd actually brought down a small chalkboard and a Ouija board just in case it needed a way to talk to us. Instead, it used you.
Hello, children.
The professor's voice was always so strange. It would vary from moment to moment, much like its shape had in the pool. One word it might be high and squeaky, the next it might be a deep baritone or almost bestial growl. Odder still was that though we had heard his voice through your mouth, we also heard it in our head. There it wasn't a voice at all really, but some kind of song. One that we could understand and that was somehow the same as the words being spoken. We all looked around at each other as we heard the voice both inside and out. For a moment I wondered if we would all be too scared to speak when Ellis popped out with the first trembling question.
Are you the professor?
What might have been a short laugh echoed through the room, though it sounded more like a mixture of a crow's call and a woman's scream.
Yes, Ellis. I'm the thing you called the professor.
Another glance passed between us, and then Thomas was asking,
Are you a tulpa?
A brief pause, and then it answered.
Tulpa is just a name, really. A label for a larger concept that goes beyond what the word describes. But to answer your question, no. I'm not a tulpa, though they do exist.
What are you then? I asked, my concern growing. Are you a demon? Another cawing scream of laugh, this one long enough that I began to get worried.
No, Mills. Not a demon of any sort. What I am, well, there's no easy way to explain what I am, but I will try. This place, this world, is one of an infinite number of such worlds. Alternate dimensions, you might call it. And by one way of thinking, these infinite worlds sit at the center of a large expanse of reality.
The professor turned his gaze, your gaze, to Cassidy.
You remember that time you and Alex cut open the baseball?
Cassidy nodded vehemently, her eyes wide.
Well, it's kind of like that. If these infinite worlds are the core, the next layer out are the 7 realms. I don't know everything, and I don't know all of the realms. Hell is one of them. The Nightlands is another. There's Incarnata, which is where your tulpas come from, Thomas. And there's the Void. That's where I come from.
Ellis leaned forward, his expression thoughtful.
The Void? What is that? Are there others like you there?
The professor shook your head.
Oh no. There's only one of me. And the Void is a place where nothing is something. It's a place of unthought of and undreamt of things. Some might call it a dead place, but that would be wrong, because dead is something, and the Void's only substance is nothingness. Personally, I think of the Void as a place of endless potential.
It drew back your lips in a ghastly facsimile of a smile.
Look at me, for instance. I was floating in the Void, dreaming lost dreams in an endless sleep, when I sensed something new. It was a small and distant light. In that light, I could see Alex here, bored in class and thinking about his school being haunted. In some ways, I was watching myself be born. Even though it burned and hurt me, I moved towards the light. Soon, I said something else. I was hearing Thomas telling you the story of lovesick Professor Suicide. I was hearing all of your wonderful stories, pulling myself along them like a lifeline until I pushed through the membrane into this world.
The professor let your lips go slack as his eyes took us all in.
When I said there was only one of me, I meant it. Even in all the infinite versions of you and this school, only this version had the right combination of ingredients to create me. I've seen worlds where you all never meet or are all dead. I finally stopped looking at them because it saddens me so.
It paused for a moment, so I took the opportunity to ask another question. Why does it make you sad? It didn't use your expressions this time, but its strange voice sounded hurt, as though I should know without having to ask.
Because I hate to see any of you suffer. In many ways, the five of you are my parents as much as you are my friends, and I love you all.
I swallowed and was going to ask something else when Cassidy jumped in. We love you too, Professor. Another ghastly smile from you, and I decided to wait on asking my next question. But then your eyes were back on mine as the professor answered my question without it being asked.
Mills, I just want to enjoy existing and keep doing so. Help my friends and keep growing.
Your eyes stretched wide as though they were held up by invisible hooks.
In some ways, I'm not that different than having a puppy.
It swung your eyes towards Ellis.
Or a tiger cub. I need to sleep and eat so I can keep growing. I've been asleep these past few months, and now I need to eat again.
It licked your lips absently.
And I'm very hungry.
Thank you very much for listening, everybody. Hope you enjoyed this so far. I shall be back soon with the next episode. I thank you so much for listening. And don't forget,